I'll basically put my kit on to start off with, always, because I don't want to be adding kit as I go along with the session where I'm covered in tacky, etc. So what I'll do is what I use, I wear lifting shoes. I've got my knee sleeves on under here. It's pretty cold, so I like to wrap up. I've got like some underlayers on that are pretty tight, just so I don't like to come down and feel exposed, especially when it's so cold. And then what I'll do, which is where I feel where a lot of people go wrong, in my opinion, is most of the time when we're training stones, when we have stones in a comp, it's actually going to be, we're actually going to be able to use tacky, like I'd say 9 times out of 10, but I don't think, I'm not sure I've ever done a comp where you're not allowed to use tacky. So I see more people holding themselves back by the limited skill in using tacky than I do from getting the benefit of getting strong tackless. So I see a lot of people training tackless and then really struggling to, like being inconsistent when they come to actually doing a proper comp stone run. Or it really kills me when I see people struggling with where basically they go to a heavy stone and then I just see their arms slipping, or I see them trying to get their hands really, really low because they're not confident having that the hands are locked in a position. They're not confident to use the tacky because they just simply haven't practiced enough. And the reason why you've got to pay your dues with tacky is because it's ever changing. What's optimal changes for so many different scenarios. So it's so important. People always ask me, which is a pet peeve, oh, which is the best tacky? Or I've used this tacky's shit, this one's really good. Well, actually, it's just so weather dependent. The best tacky that you have right now, let's say I have right now at like 8 degrees, when it's -1, -2, it's pretty useless. When it's like 20 degrees, 25 degrees in the summer, it's useless. But it doesn't mean that the tacky's bad, it's just that you're using the wrong one for the job. So I can't really see on here, but there's about 15 different pots of tacky on there. And what I'll do is I'll always use the what I feel is the best for the situation. So what I'll do when I'm training is I'll find a tacky that's pretty pliable like this. You can see how that's straight out the pot, a little bit of work, and it's it's moving about. I'm not a fan of you see people using a microwave or warming up the tacky before they train. I'm not a fan of this because the tacky will just soon go back to room temperature, and then it'll stick to the stone. The stone's going to be whatever temperature the room is going to be. So the tacky is just going to stick to the stone and then be pretty much useless. It may actually be a bit of a hindrance because it's not going to be grippy at all, but it's an extra layer that can slip. Whereas I like getting the tacky something like this. So a little note, I have done 0 warm-up, and I'm not recommending that everybody does it like this, but I'm just coming in, just doing stones today in this little session, half an hour, 40 minutes. And I just start light enough that I can just go straight in. So my PB is 100, I think it was 178 over 54 or 52 inches. So approximately this height with 178. So people may be surprised that I'm starting with a 90 kilo and that I'm using tacky straight away. So I'll do a warm up and then I'll explain the reasoning. And you may be surprised at how difficult this looks. So I'm going to go to 50 inches to start off with. I'll do one more. I'll go a little bit deeper on this one. And yeah, it feels pretty difficult, and it always does, and it always feels like a shock to me. It always feels like, you know, it's something really uncomfortable and like almost like a shocking sensation. But that's why I personally find it's very easy to get distracted putting stones at the end of your session, end of event session, especially sometimes personally for me, if I've had a really good session, I come to stones, I'm thinking, oh, it's quite hard to keep motivated and keep amped, just being real. So sometimes when I feel like I'm not kind of giving it 100%, or I just haven't got that much left in the tank, and it's something that's quite important to me, I find it really beneficial to do like what I've done today and just put it as its own session. So you come in, and when you're relatively fresh, not just physically but mentally, you come in and you're putting that effort into stones rather than just putting it at the end of the session because it's practical, because it's messy, and then you can go home straight afterwards. So I'm not happy with that. 90 felt really difficult actually. It just felt lethargic, heavy, uncomfortable. So what I would find that if I'm in a rush and say I'd be strong enough to go to say 120 next, but what I would find is that when I've done that in the past recently, I've noticed that when if I jumped up like that and it was a little bit slow, that's when I've been sometimes getting a bit of sternum pain. And a lot of people get sternum pain because the technique is it's maybe a technical issue, where I see a lot of people squeezing the stone into the sternum and then using that as like the point to load it from. Personally, I find, especially for lightweights, that I personally find that stabilising it low and almost squeezing into your tummy a lot more comfortable. So if you're somebody that experiences sternum pain, like actually just give it a try where you're trying to squeeze the stone into your tummy, and then when it's going over your sternum, try and minimise that time. So that's what I'm thinking of on this one now. I'm going to stabilise low and really squeeze in, and hopefully it'll be a little bit less uncomfortable. And then what I'm going to do is really accelerate over the sternum, so the time under tension when it's on the sternum is really low, and see if we can get it feeling a bit more comfortable. So on that one, I'm really accelerating up a lot better. And in fact, what I'll do now, because that felt a lot better, is before rolling the bigger stones in, I like to stick with the same stone, but progress the height. So I'll go here, and again, this is just so easy because it's such a low percentage, but I'm getting that real exposure, feeling that uncomfortable thing over my body. So 50 inches, 55 inches. And what I feel every time I start building up the height, I feel like my upper back unlock a little bit. I feel like my upper back crack and open up the range of motion. So again, I find it really beneficial to do it with really light weights. But it felt easy. So what I'll do is I'll go to the next one. I'll go to 60 inches. And notice that I'm going for the lap and load technique throughout. And I'm getting to the point where my tacky is running a bit low, which I feel that if I'm getting to the point where my stones are at my best, I know that my stones are at my best when I can just, I don't even have to, a lot of people focus so much on the squeeze off the floor. So this was a question that I got actually in the box, was I'm all right when it's on the lap in extending, but I struggle getting it from the floor to the lap. And I find that a lot of people, the big error is they're focusing so much on, logically, a lot of people try and focus on the squeeze strength to improve the grip. But then I find that if they're relying so much on that and actually not using the equipment properly, it just reaches a threshold where you can squeeze yourself and it's just not making as much of an effect as actually just using your tacky properly. So instead of thinking about squeezing and really creating a lot of upper body tension to pull it into your lap, personally what I like to think is I like to get my equipment so reliable, i.e. my tacky, it's almost like deadlifting with a set of tight figure of 8 straps. You're setting the deadlift to the bar, your figure 8 straps are locking in, and then you're just focusing on, you're not focusing on pulling with the arms when you're deadlifting, you're just focusing on, you're attached to the implement, you're just focusing on standing up. So that's what I think that we should all aim to do on the pickup, is get so reliable with the kit, with your tacky, that you can do that. And then if an advanced strategy with that, which I've noticed by accident when I've done like last man standing stones, where it's been like, say you've loaded like a pretty heavy stone and then had like 20-30 second rest till somebody else comes. And I've noticed, because having that time rest, that you learn how to be more efficient as the thing goes along. So I've noticed when I've been like, did it a couple of years ago, where it was like 10 reps deep with 140, that I noticed my technique was significantly different. And the big thing was I was trusting my tacky, because basically I needed to preserve energy because it was so exhausting. Whereas at first I'm like going like this low to basically get as much surface area in contact with the stone. But then as I went along, I got more confident. Actually, remember, all we need to do is get that from the ground to the knee. We don't need to have max grip, we just need to have enough grip. So that's a really important thing to think about. So even though I had more grip going this low in terms of surface area being in contact, actually I had plenty of grip just being here. So that's what I focused on. So as the sets went on, I noticed my pickup position was a lot more efficient. I'll see if I can demonstrate with this. So as I come in, I'm not that confident with the tacky. I'm like here. And then as it goes along, again, I might just need a little bit more tacky. I might have enough. Just notice the pickup height there, and that felt so much easier. So that's to 60 inches. Again, I'm not happy. I'm just talking through what goes through my head when I'm training, by the way. So hopefully some people might find it helpful. So I didn't like the crash there. I like to think about a silent load, and this is stuff that it might surprise some people that haven't seen me train before. But I do a lot of work with, like, notice I'm not out of breath or anything like that. I do a lot of work with really submaximal weights, and I get my positioning, my timing, my equipment, everything really confident. And then at the top end, I'm confident. Like basically, when I'm confident enough to go to 110, 120, I'll go to 130, 140, 150 soon after usually. But I'll do, because the time spent with that amount of weight is a lot more kind of costly. So I don't want to be working things out. If for me, really over 120 really, I don't want to be messing about with my technique there. I just want to be going to it and thinking about sending it. So this is why I like to optimize what I'm doing with the lighter weights. So I'll go again, but I'll look for a quieter load, because like say if it's crashing, especially if you're doing a stone run, like if that's not settling, you have to waste time making the stone settle before you can move on to the next one. So I'm going to simulate now that I'm doing practicing for a stone run. I'm going to go for a silent load. And I'll do that again. I didn't like that one because that was too far the other way, where I'm actually catching the lip there. So if I do that if I'd have done that rep with even though it was quieter, if I'd have done that rep with a 120, 130, caught the lip there, that's just indicating I'm trying to just push it in a little bit too early. And that could be, you see that error creep in with a lot of people. How often do you see where they look like they're loading the stone, catch the lip, and then boom, yeah? So for me, I hate that when I'm catching the lip, because it means that basically I'm trying to catch my chips too early. The stone's too close. So basically I'm going and I'm leaning forward already. So it gets to the point where I need to grind, or I need a little bit more high, and I've messed it up. I've messed my opportunity because the stone's already out in front. Whereas if I'm still here, the stone's still here, and it's still touching, I've got the opportunity to keep going and get it up a little bit higher. So I'm going to go for that again. I'm going to try, I don't want it to go too high and crash, so then it's low to settle, but I don't want it to catch the lip. I want it to be a quiet low before I go to the top one. Maybe it's putting me off being a little bit too close to this, especially with the lighter weights. Just think about it, when you've got the lighter weights, you've got a little bit more margin for error. You know, if you find that, say, you're a little bit too close here, that might be optimal for the heavier stone, so you can go here, and then as soon as you've got enough height, you can just sneak it on. Maybe you don't need to be quite as close with the like earlier stones and sub-maximal. Maybe it'll just give you a bit more confidence to just go head down. You're not going to bang your head on the way up. Let's give it a go. So that was the one. That was a lot quieter. Yeah. So that settled really quick. I'm on to the next one. I'll just go one more, and I will go to. No, in fact, I'm going to go back to the start. Like, people ask me about, like, why would you one motion? What's the point in one motion in or whatever? And it's just quicker, slightly different movement pattern. You're not going to be able to go quite as heavy with it, but it's going to be good for energy preservation if you do it in a stone run. So basically, with a one motion on any given rep, it's going to be, you know, say your max was like 120 one motion. If you do 90, say 75% roughly, it's going to feel a lot easier and a lot more energy efficient to probably do that 90 with a one motion technique than a lap and load technique. The lap and load with that 90 actually feels quite tiring, but it doesn't get disproportionately more tiring as I go up with the weights. Whereas the one motion, I'll go to one motions now, and it'll feel, maybe even look easier than the lap and loads. It'll be cost a lot less energy, but the ceiling's a little bit lower. Well, significantly lower. So whereas I've done like 178 with a lap and load, the one motion techniques, I've done 140 for 2, and they were like really slow and not the kind of technique that I'd use in a comp. It wouldn't probably my limit, what I'd use in a comp on a good set of stones would be probably about a 110. So definitely like 90s or 100s, I'd be looking at doing if I was doing like say 90, 100, 120, 130, 140 stone run, I'd be looking at, I'd be studying my times, but I'd be looking at maybe getting, maybe doing the first two with a one motion technique. So I'll try now, and notice that, by the way, I've got plenty of tacky here. I'd really struggle with any of these without tacky, but notice that I've got, tacky, where the tacky is on my hands here. I've got a little bit on my not really, it's just the bit that's off the stones on the forearms. I've got plenty of grip, and I'm a big fan of actually relying on keeping my arms straight and using my hands as shovels. And the shovels are the point of contact, like the figure of 8 straps. And that's where I put the tacky on as the main connection. That's personally what I find works best for me. And then when I get to like a top set or competition, I'll put it on my forearms as well as like an insurance policy. It's all going to help. But I think if you're just relying on not put, what I did when I started off was everybody put the tacky on the forearms, so I was focusing on clamping the forearms to the stone. And not only did this just give me so much pain on my forearms, and so much that I couldn't actually do it bare arm because I was in agony. If I did it bare arm, my arms were just ripping open straight away. So then I had to use stone sleeves or tape, which I just think it's just a bit of a pain in the ass. And also something else that can go wrong, personally, I find. So notice the start position difference between my old technique of relying on the forearms to connect and actually just using my hands to connect with the forearms in contact passively, let's say. Right, let's go. So I'm going to go back down to the. So even if you're not going to use one motions as a in fact, I'll do it and then talk. So here. So basically what you're doing with the, if you think you'd like to learn one motion, you probably see that they're a lot quicker and actually a lot more energy efficient there, feel really good. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to give, a lot of people want to learn one motions, but then they find it's like, oh, I can't get my head around it, it's so technical. I think the simplest way to learn one motions is actually go back to the start when you started doing stones. And if you're somebody who started off and you had exposure to a light enough stone to learn with, to, you know, like say me starting and it started with a 70 or something, like intuitively, I'd go to that with a lot of people. If you just came in and just said, just put it up to the platform, providing you were strong enough for the weight, intuitively, what most people do is actually just stand up. Just connect to the stone and then stand up. So just watch it through a different lens of being a beginner and just picking up that stone and just standing up with it. So yeah, just pick up the stone. So just notice, rather than it being a fancy, one motion advanced technique skill, like actually just think, connect yourself to the stone and just stand up, yeah? And then you find that most beginners actually learn the lap and load as a secondary thing. So what you might find that what people do is they'll go to like almost fail one motion, and then they can re-grip in the lap. And then from here. So, what I do find is really important if people want to use one motion technique, and why a lot of people mess up in a comp is because they'll go from basically doing the one motion technique and then struggle to switch over to the lap and load. So I'd say that it's really beneficial to do the one motion and then actually practice transitioning to the lap and load really quickly. So what I'll do now is I'll do one motion and then one lap and load. Just because I see that some people make the error of not warming up the lap and load technique, and actually the lap and load technique being harder than it usually would be. So other questions that I've received on stones. What was that? How would I train for a max, and how would I train for a max stone versus stone run? So for a max, what I think is really important is maximising the stretch reflex. So I specifically wear knee sleeves for stones, not to protect my knees, but to actually be a performance enhancer, that I'll actually try and actively accelerate into the hole and to use that rebound out. So I think that's a really important thing. So in order to maximise that, where a lot of people go wrong is a lot of people will lap and then they'll sit down in the hole and then they'll go up to drive from that. And you know, I see people lifting some brilliant massive weights doing that, but I always think in my head, I think, just imagine if they use the stretch reflex. It's a way that to lift more weight and lift any given weight easier without getting any stronger is just by using the stretch reflex. So how would we do that on a say a sub-maximal stone run? Say the stone run that I just described. Say me say I can load 180-ish, doing like say 90 to 130, 140. Like I'd be focusing on doing a fast lap and load towards the end of that run. Something like, I'd be like one motion, one motion, one motion, and then where I'm like accelerating into the hole there and bouncing out. But the problem comes when it's a maximal weight of, you might not have the confidence. The thing is, like I'm going to be strong enough for the 140 that it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. You know, if my hand position's slightly out, the negative consequence of having my hand position slightly out isn't going to outweigh the benefit that I'm getting from accelerating into the hole. So long as if I'm balanced as I do it. But obviously when you're doing a maximal weight, this changes. So when you're doing a maximal weight, what I would focus on is, or what I do focus on, is actually getting the stone into the lap. And then what I might do is actually lap it here, make sure my positioning's good, and if you get a good lap position here, it actually feels really comfortable, yeah? And then what I do here, instead of driving up, what I do, maybe room my feet in a little bit to my strongest squat position, but then reset myself so I can accelerate back down into the hole and then drive into that. So I would practice that purposefully and speed up the transition of that. So I'm going to go lap, and then I might move my foot in a little bit, go down into the hole, make sure my hands are right up, and up like that. And that way I'm making sure that I get my hands right, but I'm still getting the stretch reflex benefit. So the other thing I got asked was about hand position. So with hand position on the bigger stones, personally, I'm a fan from training in all kinds of conditions, in terms of with stones that are dusty, sometimes the stones are wet, sometimes they're just terrible to grip, sometimes the tacky is just not great for the temperature. I find that the technique that's most consistent for me to load a moderate stone to height, or if I was going for a heavy stone, would be actually when I'm re-lapping, I like to go more around the equator of the stone with my elbows. You see a lot of people going elbows over like this. A lot of people feel that they can maybe get a bigger range of motion there, whereas personally I don't, because I find that if I'm internally rotating the shoulder, this limits shoulder flexion, makes it harder to lift my arms overhead. So if I'm loading to height, it actually makes it harder for me to load to height. Whereas if my shoulders in a more neutral position, elbows are, you know, more like, say, here than here, then the shoulder flexion is automatically feels easier. So if you're one of those guys that's loading stone, trying to load stone to height, and you're struggling, and you might struggle with like overhead positioning on overhead lifts, for instance, then yeah, I personally think that this is definitely better for me. The thing to be cautious of is that in this position here, you can get your biceps a lot more active. So you've got to make sure that you're not actually actively trying to pull with the biceps. You're not trying to do anything with the biceps here. You're actually just almost like going bear hug, like a seated row. And I think about squeezing tension in my upper back, only using the arms to connect you to the objects, like isometrically or statically. And then from there, I'm just connected and exploding through the legs, and then the arms are just moving up as a secondary thing. So we'll go here. Again, equator on the pick, which is pretty obvious. But then from here, instead of here, which I think, by the way, if people are getting bicep trigger, if your biceps getting triggered from stones, especially on the extension, like actually going arms over like that, it can just be a brilliant remedy to take away a lot of the discomfort. But just because it puts the bicep in a position that's harder to activate. So it can be a really good thing to have in your locker. But personally, I find here, imagine this stone's really wet, or the grip's not good. I just feel.
Now it's a little bit heavier, just make sure one of them your grip looks a bit far, a bit towards the back of the hand, which was fine, so like try and, you know, that front.
I just feel so connected on that. So that'll do for today's stone guide. So any questions that you leave on this, I will answer in the thread.